His name is Joe Goldberg. Behind his charming smile and boyish good looks lies a dark and twisted psyche, one that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about human nature. He has a habit of watching people, studying their habits, and analysing their behaviours. From the moment he meets someone, he begins to unravel their lives, piecing together the intricacies of their daily routines, their likes and dislikes, and their deepest secrets. He's always one step ahead, watching from the shadows, learning everything he can about his targets. But Joe's surveillance goes beyond mere curiosity. It's a crucial part of his modus operandi. He needs to know everything about his victims to manipulate them, to control them, and to ultimately eliminate any perceived threats to his twisted idea of love. His obsession with his prey is all-encompassing, and he'll go to great lengths to ensure that he remains undetected. This behaviour is not only creepy and invasive, but it's also a hallmark trait of psychopathy. Psychopaths are often known for their ability to read people and manipulate them, and Joe's constant surveillance is a prime example of this. His obsession with control and dominance over his targets is what makes him such a dangerous and calculating individual. But are you subscribed? Everyone who is watching this video right now isn't subscribed, so please sub, it means a lot. Before we begin our analysis of Joe's character, it's important to define what a psychopath is. Psychopathy is a personality disorder characterized by a lack of empathy, impulsivity, and a disregard for social norms and rules. Psychopaths are often charming and manipulative, able to use their charisma and charm to manipulate and deceive others. They may present themselves as likable and trustworthy, while hiding their true intentions and motivations. This ability to charm and manipulate others makes them particularly dangerous, as they can often get close to their victims before revealing their true nature. Psychopaths tend to act on impulse, without considering the consequences of their actions. They may engage in risky behaviors, such as substance abuse, reckless driving, or criminal activities, without any regard for the potential consequences. Psychopaths often have a disregard for social norms and rules. They may engage in criminal behavior or violate social norms without any sense of guilt or remorse. This can include behaviors such as lying, stealing, or even violent acts. It's important to note that not all individuals with psychopathic traits engage in criminal behavior or become violent. However, those who do often pose a significant risk to themselves and others. As we analyze Joe's character, we'll need to keep these core traits of psychopathy in mind and explore how they manifest in his behavior and actions. There are several key events in Joe's life that may have contributed to his potential psychopathy. For example, his traumatic childhood, where he witnessed his mother being abused by his father, could have contributed to his lack of empathy towards women. Additionally, his romantic relationships, particularly with Beck and Love, may have contributed to his delusional and obsessive behavior. These events are important to consider when evaluating Joe's potential psychopathy. In Season 1 of You, we are introduced to Joe Goldberg, a bookstore manager who becomes infatuated with a customer named Guinevere Beck. Joe's obsession with Beck quickly spirals out of control as he begins stalking her and gathering information about her personal life. He goes to extreme lengths to insert himself into her life, including breaking into her apartment and stealing her phone in order to read her text messages. Despite his increasingly concerning behavior, Joe presents himself as a caring and protective individual, going out of his way to protect Beck from harm. He can manipulate those around him, including Beck's friends, in order to get closer to her. However, as the season progresses, it becomes clear that Joe's actions are not motivated by love, but by a desire for control and possession over Beck. Throughout Season 1, we see Joe display several traits consistent with psychopathy, including a lack of empathy for others, a tendency towards manipulation and deceit, and a sense of grandiosity. He is able to justify his behavior to himself by convincing himself that he is protecting Beck from those who would do her harm. But in reality, he is only interested in fulfilling his own desires. Joe's killing of Beck's ex-boyfriend, Benji. After Joe kidnaps and imprisons Benji in his basement, he ultimately decides to kill him in order to eliminate the threat he poses to Beck. This is a turning point for Joe's character, as it marks the first time we see him engage in an act of extreme violence. Joe's killing of Benji is a clear indication of his psychopathic tendencies. He is able to justify his actions to himself by convincing himself that he is protecting Beck from a dangerous individual. He shows a complete lack of empathy for Benji, seeing him as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed in order to achieve his goal of being with Beck. Joe's relationship with Beck's best friend, Peach. Joe is initially threatened by Peach's presence in Beck's life and seeks to eliminate her as well. He becomes obsessed with her and begins to stalk her, ultimately attempting to kill her in Central Park. However, he is ultimately unsuccessful, and Peach dies due to an accidental fall. Joe's relationships with both Benji and Peach are indicative of his lack of regard for human life. He sees both individuals as obstacles to be eliminated in order to achieve his own goals, displaying a complete disregard for their well-being or safety. These events also set up the central conflict of the series, with Joe's actions leading to a spiral of violence and deception that becomes increasingly difficult to control. In addition to his psychopathic tendencies, Joe's behaviour in Season 1 of You also demonstrates a clear pattern of abusive behaviour towards Beck. He seeks to control every aspect of her life, manipulating her friends and sabotaging her relationships with other men. He also uses emotional manipulation to keep Beck isolated from those who care about her, convincing her that he is the only one who truly understands and cares for her. Joe's abusive behaviour is particularly evident in his treatment of Beck's former boyfriend, Benji. He kidnaps and imprisons Benji, subjecting him to physical and emotional abuse in order to force him to confess to his past behaviour towards Beck. This behaviour is not only indicative of Joe's disregard for human life, but also his desire to exert complete control over Beck and anyone else who he perceives as a threat to their relationship. As the season progresses, Joe's behaviour becomes increasingly erratic and dangerous. He becomes more obsessed with Beck, and his actions become more extreme in order to maintain his hold over her. This includes breaking into her apartment and stealing her phone, as well as physically assaulting one of Beck's friends who he perceives as a threat. Joe's behaviour in Season 1 of You highlights the dangers of toxic relationships and the devastating impact they can have on those involved. It also sheds light on the complexities of psychopathic behaviour and the ways in which it can be difficult to recognise and address. The events of Season 1 set the stage for the rest of the series, with Joe's behaviour leading to a spiral of violence and deception that becomes increasingly difficult to control. It also raises important questions about the nature of obsession and the impact it can have on individuals and those around them. In Season 2 of You, Joe moves to Los Angeles under a new identity and begins a new relationship with a woman named Love Quinn. This season sees Joe grappling with the consequences of his actions in Season 1, as well as confronting new challenges and temptations that test his resolve. One of the key developments in Joe's character in Season 2 is his newfound sense of guilt and remorse for his past actions. He is haunted by the memories of Benji and Peach, and is desperate to avoid making the same mistakes again. However, as he becomes more entangled in Love's life and the web of secrets and lies surrounding her family, he finds himself increasingly drawn back into his old patterns of behaviour. Joe's relationship with Love is also a key development in his character arc. Unlike Beck, who Joe saw as an object to be possessed, Love is a more complex and nuanced character who presents a genuine emotional connection for Joe. However, even as he tries to build a healthy and stable relationship with Love, he finds himself struggling with his desire for control and possession. Throughout Season 2, we see Joe continue to display a number of traits consistent with psychopathy, including his tendency towards manipulation and deceit, his lack of empathy for others, and his grandiosity. However, we also see glimpses of a more human side to Joe as he grapples with his guilt and attempts to overcome his darker impulses. Season 2 of You sees Joe's character become more complex and nuanced as he struggles with the consequences of his past actions and tries to build a healthier relationship with Love. However, as the season progresses, it becomes clear that Joe's path towards redemption is far from certain, and that his darker tendencies may be too deeply ingrained to overcome. Throughout Season 2 of You, Joe continues to exhibit violent and psychopathic behaviour, including multiple instances of murder. Early in the season, he kills a private investigator who is investigating him, and later he kills Delilah, a journalist who uncovers some of his secrets. While Joe does show some signs of guilt and remorse for his actions, these feelings are often fleeting and quickly give way to his more deeply ingrained desire for control and power. He rationalizes his actions as necessary to protect those he loves, even as he acknowledges the harm that he is causing. One of the key themes of the show is the idea that Joe's behavior is not simply a result of his past traumas or circumstances, but is rather an inherent part of who he is as a person. Despite his efforts to change and overcome his darker impulses, he remains fundamentally incapable of true empathy or remorse. This is particularly evident in the way that Joe treats his victims, who he often sees as objects to be controlled and manipulated, rather than as people with their own agency and worth. He is willing to commit acts of violence and even murder in order to achieve his goals, and he shows little regard for the impact that his actions have on others. Season 2 of You reinforces the idea that Joe's violent and psychopathic behavior is a fundamental aspect of his character, character, and that his attempts to change or redeem himself are ultimately doomed to failure. While he may experience moments of guilt or self-reflection, these are ultimately overshadowed by his more deeply ingrained desire for power and control. In Season 3 of You, Joe's character continues to develop in complex and unpredictable ways. He and his partner Love have moved to a new town, and Joe is attempting to start a new life and leave his violent past behind him. However, as the season progresses, it becomes clear that Joe's darker impulses are never far from the surface. He becomes increasingly fixated on his neighbour, a writer named Natalie, and begins to stalk her and manipulate her in much the same way that he did with his previous victims. At the same time, Joe's relationship with Love becomes increasingly strained, as he realises that she is not the perfect partner he had imagined her to be. He struggles with feelings of betrayal and anger, and these emotions lead him to make increasingly dangerous and irrational decisions. One of the key themes of Season 3 is the idea that Joe's past traumas and experiences continue to shape his behaviour, even as he attempts to leave them behind. Despite his efforts to change and start anew, he finds himself falling back into the same patterns of behaviour that have defined his life thus far. The show continues to explore the complexity of Joe's character, depicting him not simply as a one-dimensional villain, but as a deeply flawed and conflicted individual. While his behaviour is often reprehensible, there are moments when he displays genuine kindness and empathy, suggesting that there is more to his character than meets the eye. Season 3 of You represents a continuation of Joe's character arc as he struggles to come to terms with his past and navigate the challenges of his present. While he may never be able to fully overcome his psychopathic tendencies, the show suggests that there is still hope for him to find redemption and a measure of peace. In Season 3 of You, Joe's tendency to engage in violent and manipulative behaviour continues to be a central aspect of his character. Despite his efforts to start a new life and leave his past behind, he finds himself unable to resist the urge to stalk and manipulate those around him. One key event in Season 3 is Joe's obsession with his neighbour Natalie. He becomes fixated on her and begins to stalk her, going so far as to break into her home and install cameras so that he can watch her every move. He also begins to manipulate her by offering her drugs and alcohol in an attempt to control her and win her affection. Another key event in Season 3 is Joe's involvement with a local bookstore owner named Theo. After discovering that Theo is running a scheme to scam wealthy customers, Joe decides to take matters into his own hands and blackmails him into leaving town. However, when Theo refuses to comply, Joe resorts to violence and ultimately kills him. Throughout Season 3, it becomes increasingly clear that Joe's violent and manipulative tendencies are deeply ingrained and unlikely to change. While he may attempt to control his impulses and start a new life, he is ultimately unable to resist the urge to manipulate and harm those around him. Despite this, the show continues to explore the complexity of Joe's character, highlighting his internal struggles and the conflicting emotions that drive his behaviour. While he may engage in reprehensible actions, there are moments when he displays genuine empathy and compassion, suggesting that he is more than just a one-dimensional villain. Season 3 of You serves to further complicate Joe's character and deepen our understanding of his motivations and behaviour. While he may never be able to fully overcome his psychopathic tendencies, the show suggests that there is still room for growth and change, even in the face of his darkest impulses. Joe displays several psychopathic traits in Season 4. Throughout the season, we see him engaging in manipulative behaviour, lacking empathy, and engaging in violent acts. In a flashback, Joe tracks down Marianne in London, but chooses to let her go after she calls him a murderer. Or so he thought. This shows that Joe is capable of controlling his actions and making calculated decisions based on his own interests. However, Joe's lack of empathy is evident when he instead chooses to pickpocket Marianne's necklace and sends its picture to Elliot to make it appear he killed her. He shows no remorse for potentially framing someone for murder or the potential consequences of his actions. In the present, Joe lives under his new identity as Jonathan Moore, a university English professor. He develops an interest in Kate Galvin, the girlfriend of his obnoxious fellow professor Malcolm Harding. Despite Malcolm's abrasive behaviour, Joe's decision to kill him after waking up next to his body shows that Joe has a violent side and is capable of extreme actions. Furthermore, Joe's attempts to cover up his crime and avoid getting caught by the police show that he is manipulative and willing to go to great lengths to protect himself. He is able to deceive others, including Kate, into thinking he is a trustworthy and caring person. Joe's actions throughout the season also show that he is willing to engage in violence to protect his interests. When faced with the possibility of being caught by the real killer, Joe kills Vic to protect himself. He also engages in a physical altercation with Roald when accused of being the killer. Joe's character in Season 4 displays several psychopathic traits, including manipulation, lack of empathy, and violent tendencies. While his actions may seem calculated and strategic, they ultimately show a disregard for the well-being of others and a willingness to engage in extreme actions to protect himself. Joe Goldberg's character is a complex and multifaceted depiction of a person struggling with mental illness. While the show portrays Joe as exhibiting traits consistent with psychopathy, it's important to note that not all individuals with mental illness exhibit these same traits. Mental illness is a broad and varied category, and it's crucial to approach it with nuance and sensitivity. The portrayal of mental illness in media is a complex issue, as it can both inform and shape our perceptions of mental health. Depictions of mental illness in popular culture have the potential to perpetuate harmful stereotypes and misconceptions, which can negatively impact individuals living with mental illness. At the same time, media can also serve as a platform for raising awareness and reducing stigma surrounding mental health issues. It's important to evaluate these portrayals critically and with sensitivity, considering both the potential impact on audiences and the accuracy of the portrayal. While the character of Joe Goldberg may be a compelling and dramatic depiction of psychopathy, it's crucial to remember that individuals with mental illness are not inherently violent or dangerous. The complexity and diversity of mental illness should be reflected in media portrayals in order to promote understanding and compassion for those struggling with these conditions. Ultimately, the portrayal of mental illness in media should strive for accuracy, nuance, and empathy, recognizing the humanity and individuality of those living with these conditions. By doing so, we can promote a more compassionate and informed understanding of mental health, both on and off the screen.